In 1996, post-Soviet Russia was undergoing the largest, most chaotic privatization of natural resources in history. A Stanford-educated American investor named Bill Browder arrived in Moscow looking at this market with a very specific theory. This chart plots out his theory. Browder saw a massive, irrational gap between the artificially low trading price of these newly privatized companies and the immense actual value of the raw materials they controlled. If an investor could capture even a fraction of the space between the market price and the real-world value, the expected returns would be extraordinary. Rampant, hidden corporate corruption was the only force keeping those trading prices completely divorced from reality. Exposing that theft was the key to realizing the fund's extraordinary gains. To execute this, Browder launched the Hermitage Fund, backed by the immense institutional credibility of Swiss banking legend Edmond Safra. With Safra's backing, Browder began practicing shareholder activism as a contact sport. Browder hired investigators to map the offshore structures and shell companies Russian oligarchs used to siphon money. Once mapped, they published the evidence. By naming specific oligarchs and documenting theft, Hermitage forced genuine improvements in corporate governance. During this phase in the 1990s, the paper trail was entirely financial. Transparency and meticulous documentation were simply tools used to maximize investment returns. The strategy worked, catching the attention of Russia's most powerful men, including oligarch Vladimir Potanin. The Russian state retaliated aggressively. In 2005, officials officially labeled Browder a threat to national security and expelled him from the country. With Browder exiled, the state turned its physical and legal apparatus against the Hermitage team left behind in Moscow. State officials arrested Sergei Magnitsky, Browder's dedicated tax advisor. Magnitsky was placed into pre-trial detention at Butyrka prison, a notoriously brutal facility. The fight for transparency in corporate balance sheets now met the physical reality of a corrupt, unchecked state apparatus. Magnitsky spent 358 agonizing days in detention. The state subjected him to horrific conditions and deliberately denied him medical care. Despite the physical torture intended to force a false confession, Magnitsky refused to capitulate. He turned to the only tool he had left: documentation. He created a second paper trail, writing hundreds of formal complaints from his freezing cell. He provided a granular record of his mistreatment, naming the specific state officials responsible for both his torture and the underlying theft of state funds. In November 2009, Sergei Magnitsky died in his cell. He was 37 years old. The Russian officials involved believed killing the accountant would permanently bury the evidence of their crimes. But Magnitsky's detailed, handwritten record of abuses survived him and was smuggled out of the prison. Browder vowed to avenge his lawyer. He took this indisputable, primary source proof to Western governments to demand justice. This flowchart illustrates the resulting Magnitsky Act. It shows how targeted individuals are blocked from crossing borders or accessing international banks. Instead of sanctioning an entire country, it specifically freezes the assets of individual human rights abusers. Every one of those asset freezes and travel bans traces its legal authority straight back to the names Magnitsky spelled out in pencil from his cell. This act altered global geopolitics, creating a way to punish corrupt officials by locking them out of the Western banking system they relied upon. This map shows the global reach of the Magnitsky Act today. 33 individual countries have enacted the legislation to date.
The law is actively used to hold the original perpetrators accountable. Vladimir Potanin, the man Browder originally targeted in the 1990s, was officially sanctioned by the UK and EU in 2022. The Russian state apparatus operated with immense, seemingly untouchable power, while Magnitsky was kept entirely vulnerable and isolated in a freezing cell. The most powerful, nuclear-armed oligarchy in the world was ultimately outmaneuvered. They are still facing direct financial consequences today because of the record a dying man made with a pencil and paper.